Do the countdown? Are we at 1:30?
Good afternoon. We are live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the session of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. This afternoon, we are talking about the OPEB funding policy, and this committee has been talking about this for a while, back in the spring, and in particular, on May 16th, the County Council discussed updating the OPEB funding policy options. And we know that the executive and council staff have been meeting very regularly since June of this year. And today they are going to present the policy for our consideration. Before I turn it over to our council staff, I just want to say thank you to everyone who put in all the work on this. I know there was a great deal of meeting and discussions, and I know thanks to Bolton, our actuarial advisor, a number of simulations were run to really help answer questions that we had as a committee last spring. And so I just want to say thank you for all the work and thought that has gone into this. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Howard to kick us off.
Wonderful. And so Craig Howard and Aaron Trompgar here on behalf of the council staff, and Corey Orlowski from the Office of Management and Budget, Karen Hawkins from the Department of Finance, Jenna Shevlin and Karen Bass from the Office of Human Resources, and then, of course, Tom Vicente from Bolton Partners are all here to participate and answer questions that you may have. I'll start by kind of walking through what the work group did, and then we can move into the different policy elements that were recommended by the county executive, and can stop at each one and ask any questions and have discussion on each of the different policy elements. As the chair noted, a lot of work has gone into this since May. We spent the summer meeting weekly and into the fall to discuss different policy options and different elements. And so we really appreciate the collaboration with the executive branch staff. It's been a great example of how the different branches of government can work together towards a common policy goal. And of course, as you also mentioned, none of this would have been possible without the help from Bolton. They ran so many different scenarios for us, and even scenarios they weren't expecting to run when we made some more last-minute requests. And their flexibility and availability in doing that was really great, and we could not have done that without them. Kind of coming out of what the council had asked us to do in May, we began meeting with as a group. And we took the original elements that the council had endorsed, which were an 85% funded ratio target, 15-year closed amortization, 7.5% assumed rate of return, and looked at what we could do to get a better understanding of some of the unknowns that we had talked about in May, which is a lot of it revolved around what happens under different scenarios, and how would the investment performance impact withdrawals, contributions, how does that impact the budget, kind of what could happen outside of the best case scenario. So what we ended up doing is creating 5 scenarios that we had Bolton do a full suite of analysis on. And these are listed on page 2 of the staff report. The first is the scenario initially endorsed by the council as a starting point, which was the 85% funded ratio target over 15 years. And each of these scenarios, all 5 of these included the 15-year closed amortization and the 7.5% rate of return. Scenario number 2 was a 75% funded ratio target over 15 years. Scenario 3 was a 75% funded ratio target over 15 years with a minimum $10 million annual trust withdrawal. Scenario 4 was a 75% funded ratio target with a $250 million one-time contribution to get us to that target funded level right away, as opposed to waiting the 15-year period. And scenario 5 was maintaining the current funded ratio, which was about approximately 56%, with fixed trust withdrawals starting at $32 million per year and increasing by 2.25% annually. So the first thing we did after identifying the scenarios was identifying a set of stress testing elements to apply to each of the different scenarios to see how they would play out in practice. So what we did to represent potential investment volatility, Bolton used historic investment returns for the county and calculated what could occur in the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile of investment return outcomes. So the 25th percentile would represent a pessimistic scenario over the course of 15 years. So you have an actual average return of closer to 5.3% instead of the 7.5% assumed. The 50th percentile reflects the median outcome, where you do achieve the 7.5%, but you don't achieve the 7.5% each year. It varies, like it kind of does in the real world. And the 75th percentile reflects an optimistic scenario, if returns are better than projected, and you actually end up with a 15-year average closer to 9.6%. Additionally, we did ask Bolton to include an analysis of funding guardrails in their work to protect against investment return volatility. And so the baseline 15-year phase-in period assumes that the target funded ratio will increase at a slow, steady rate until we reach the target percent. The guardrails would require that if the actual funded ratio in a particular year was 10%, more than 10% below or above what had been projected, that deficit or overage would be made up over a 2-year period. So the idea being that if your target funded ratio, or your path to the target funded ratio gets off track, it's kind of a mechanism to automatically put us back on track over a couple of years. So starting in section 2 on page 3, we have kind of a high-level summary of each of the different scenarios. And I'm going to go through scenarios 1 through 3 in a little bit more detail, because those are the ones we'll probably talk about more as we go through the different policy elements. So first on page 3, you have a table showing the different potential outcomes under the 85% funded ratio target scenario, scenario 1. And in each table, it shows the baseline scenario. So that's what occurs if you have the 7.5% each year, every year, which is the numbers, the way you do it for actuarial projections. But again, it's not probably what's likely going to happen in the real world. And then what happens if it comes in at the 50th percentile, 25th percentile, and 75th percentile. So for each of these different scenarios, we show what the highest funded ratio could be over the course of the 15 years, what the lowest funded ratio would be, where you would be after 15 years, and the year that you would probably most likely reach your funded ratio target, as well as what it means overall on the budget, the total withdrawals, total contributions, and how it impacts the general fund. So in terms of the scenario 1, a couple of key observations that we wanted to highlight is first, the variable trust withdrawals could begin as early as year 2 under this scenario. However, the amount of the variable withdrawals would vary significantly based on investment return outcomes. And that's a theme you're going to hear throughout this process as we walk through the different options. The 85% funded ratio target would likely be reached at the end of the 15-year build-up period based on the baseline or the 50th percentile outcomes. And also, under this scenario, we found that under both the 50th percentile and the 75th percentile outcomes, you're more likely to exceed or have the possibility of exceeding 100% funded in the fund. So that begins to involve, to a point where you might want to consider, is this fund overfunded or not, if you're continually at or greater than 100% funded. In scenario 2, the 75% funded ratio target, in this scenario, variable trust withdrawals could begin as early as year 1. Again, the amount and level will depend on actual investment returns. You're less likely to be in an overfunded situation, to be exceeding 100% under this scenario, under both the 50th percentile return option as well as the 75th percentile option, although there is a chance of exceeding 100% as well under this option. And generally, as you might expect, logically, withdrawals are generally higher and contributions are generally lower in this scenario than compared to the 85% funded ratio target. In scenario 3, which was the 75% funded ratio target with the $10 million minimum annual withdrawal, the $10 million fixed withdrawal does provide greater consistency for budgeting purposes, but also leads to slightly lower funded ratios compared to the scenario 2, which is not having the fixed withdrawal amount. And really, this shows up mostly in the pessimistic scenario in the 25th percentile returns. If that were to occur, you'd end up at a funded ratio that is lower than it would in the other scenarios. I'm not going to go into detail on scenarios 4 and scenarios 5, but we can answer questions on those if you'd like as we go through some of the different policy elements. And then I did want to kind of highlight some of the summary of the key work group findings that cut across all the different scenarios that we looked at. The first a significant factor for long-term sustainability and achievement of the funded ratio goal and contribution stability is timing of investment returns. If the investment returns move along at a steady pace, then all of a sudden they go up or down. That's going to impact where we are, and it could be a significant impact depending on what those returns are. So that has to be understood as part of this, that we don't know what we don't know, and there's a lot of things that could happen. And one of the implications is that one of the considerations we're telling the committee and the council to make as part of the policy decision making is considering withdrawals from the trust as potentially one-time uses of resources under the fiscal policies as compared to ongoing, depending on how you structure the policy, because we don't know how those dollars could move up and down over the course of several years. Second, volatility in the liability of the trust should be expected. We did monitor a lot of, model a lot of volatility in the investment returns, so in the assets of the trust. We kept the liability fairly constant, but we do know from historical examples that there are things that could impact liability. A great example was in FY15 when all the county agencies adopted Medicare Part D for prescription coverage, and that significantly decreased overall OPEB liability and impacted the amount that we were required to pre-fund in a good way. So liability can impact us both ways. Again, we don't know, and we should expect that there will be some changes in liability, and that could impact the funded ratio and how long it takes to get there. The risk of overfunding should be considered when setting an OPEB policy. Again, it's one of the factors to consider. It's not a hard and fast rule that if you're over 100%, you need to do something different. But if you're at a sustained level of high funding, that's just something to consider in terms of how that uses resources that are not available for something else. And the last thing is just to remember both the total value of assets and the funded ratio are both important. The funded ratio kind of tells you where you are on the assets versus liabilities, but certainly as your asset base grows, then the impact of investment returns, for example, in a good year, becomes greater because you have a higher asset base, and that's important to consider as well. So those are kind of our key findings to consider over all the options. In section C, we start describing the policy elements that were submitted by the county executive. The county executive recommends adopting an updated OPEB funding policy based on scenario 3, which is a 75% funded ratio target over 15 years with a minimum $10 million annual trust withdrawal. The executive's recommendation includes 8 different policy elements in the form of the action section of essentially of a policy resolution. And so we've described each element in the staff report, and we can walk through each element. And I can start doing that unless the committee wants to stop and ask any questions at this point.
Sure. First, before I turn it over to my colleagues, do you have any questions? Anything from the executive branch? Any opening? We're good? Okay. Anyone here?
General comments or start to go into the...
Well, that's the question. Do you have any general comments, or do you want to start going through the recommendations? Okay. All right.
Okay, sounds good. So the first element of the policy submitted by the executive was a policy goal. We've included the direct language on page 7 of the staff report. I won't reread that. Neither the council staff doesn't have any issues with that language that was submitted by the executive, and we think it reflects a strong policy goal. The only thing we want to note is that this policy is limited to Montgomery County government, and that was purposeful because that's what we have control over right now and what we wanted to start with. But we do think that after a final policy is approved, the committee may want to consider in future years whether similar policies should be adopted by other county agencies going forward, understanding that different agencies are at slightly different places in their funding structure, and so there would be different things to consider for both MCPS and the college, which are part of the consolidated trust, and then of course Park and Planning has their own trust that they manage.
Council Vice President Friedson?
Yeah, generally looks good to me. My only question is the second bullet, to ensure the long-term viability of the CRHPT. The second part, with sufficient assets to pay all or most of the county's share of earned benefits. The idea of that today is true, like our goal is to pay for all or most, but ultimately the goal is for this trust to pay for all, right? So, right? I mean, isn't the idea that the spinoff covers our annual expenses?
Yes, I think it's more in there for a what-if scenario of a truly down year where we have a $50 million loss in assets, and does the math work out that we want to do 80% of the whole in that year? Or if we have a really good year and we don't want it's just to lay in the cover that it's not an automatic turn off, that it's the entire amount once it gets to that point. It's not meant to be an out clause on all, but rather an acknowledgement that there may be scenarios 15, 20 years from now where paying $130 million of the $150 million total bill is the most sensible thing for that year.
But isn't a policy goal what our goal is for the policy to accomplish? I understand what you're saying of like you want to have an out because there might be a scenario where something happens. I think we can bake that into some of the flexibility that we have in the actual, other decisions that we're about to make. But to me, when I look at the 5, 6, 7 bullet points that say, what is the point? What's the policy goal that you're trying to accomplish? It'd say what the intention is of what the policies are that we're setting from my perspective. So my personal suggestion would just say to pay for the county share of earned benefits or to cover the county share of earned benefits, would be my preference. That's the policy goal. It doesn't always work out perfectly, but that's the policy goal.
I don't think that has a material impact on
No,
anything.
of course.
I just think that's fine.
Yeah,
I think the
That's fine.
part of the rationale was just if in case there was a year where actuarially it was determined that the fund should not cover the entire thing. Then
Yeah, and I think we should bake that
into.
into the
Yeah.
other policies that we actually, the specific elements that we actually address to give that level of flexibility, because I do think it's more fiscally responsible to have, the key is to find the right balance of strong enough that you actually follow it, which we haven't always done with our fiscal policies. We've done it mostly, but not always, and so that's the goal. But flexible enough that you can meet in unforeseen circumstance or an unprecedented situation. It's fiscally irresponsible to be too ironclad that you can't adapt. So how to find that right balance? Anyway.
Do you need the language again?
Let me read it back. To
Okay,
make
thank
sure,
you,
make
Mr.
sure it works.
Howard.
So I have that second bullet saying, ensure long-term viability of the CRHBT with sufficient assets to pay for the county's share of earned benefits.
Works for me.
Great. All right, that works for all of us. We can move on to point 2.
Okay. Point 2 is the funded ratio target and time frame. And the county executive's recommendation here is for a 75% funded ratio target over the 15-year period. As you'll recall, the GEO committee last time we met and had looked at a slightly higher target, an 85% target, which is one of the reasons we modeled all those different options to kind of look at the different differences between the two. And we did want to, and we talked about this in March, I believe, when Bolton was here last time, that one of the ideas that, and they've written about this as part of their series of white papers on OPEB funding, is that it's reasonable for governments to consider a funded ratio target of less than 100% for several reasons, overfunding being a prime factor there. And so that kind of led some of the committee discussions on what the appropriate initial target should be. I think it's important to note that there is no particular right or wrong on a funded ratio target. It's just there's kind of advantages and disadvantages with a higher target versus a lower target. And so we've tried to kind of lay out some of those advantages for each of the different potential targets here on page 8. For example, relative advantages of 75% would lower the general fund expenditures more so than the 85% target, would create more of a buffer against overfunding. And generally, you would spend about, based on the scenarios that Bolton ran, at a 75% target, about $1.56 billion in general fund expenditures over the 15-year period, compared to $1.68 billion over the course of the 15 years under the 85% funded target. In the 50th percentile. Thank you, Aaron. Yes, that's assuming that things kind of happen along the baseline. If it happens in the pessimistic or optimistic scenarios, the numbers do change a bit. And it's important to note that even under the 75% funding target, in the 50th percentile investment scenario that Bolton ran, it does end up 15 years at an 88% funded level. Again, it's important not to get too hung up on the exact numbers because this is 15 years down the road. Things will change, but there is a scenario where even if you choose a 75% funded target, you could be above that amount at the end of the 15-year period. In terms of the relative advantages of 85%, it does provide greater fiscal protection against sustained market downturns compared to the 75%, and that's shown in the pessimistic scenarios where you can see the differences in the funded ratio percentage. And also, it's important to note that the 85% option increases the prospects of reaching, while it increases the prospects of reaching 100% funding, attainment of this is generally coming from better than expected investment performance as opposed to other things. So that's an important thing to consider well. And it would provide more of a buffer in case there was an investment downturn in the future. But again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's just a level of where you think the right number is at this point in time. And I do want to point out that later we'll talk about the policy of how we'll do periodic reviews. So this is an element that, going forward, the committee and the council and the executive can look at and decide, 5 years down the road, yes, this is still the right target, whatever you choose today, or no, we want to move the target up or down for these reasons. And I'll stop there for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Howard. I think my question is actually for Mr. Vincente. From Bolton's perspective, as was noted by Mr. Howard, and your white papers on this, and what was quoted in our staff packet, if you had any thoughts regarding the 75%.
So our view is that after doing the analysis for this particular plan and looking at both 75 and 85%, they're both supportable as long-term viable options that will provide a strong fund that will have funds available to help pay, if not all, a lot of the county's obligation and maintain itself in the future for the long term. So we didn't see any sort of break point that said, oh, if you went to 75, it's going to cause this big problem in the future. Certainly more money means if there's a good investment year, there'd be more returns and more money to spend. But there's a cost for that, right? It means you're putting more money in the fund. So nothing that we saw made us say, oh gosh, there's a real actuarial difference here. Both provide strong funds that provide good security for the trust to be used in the future.
Thank you so much. I'll be supportive of going to the 75% target. I appreciate the analysis that was done and the different scenarios that were run, and I think for the reasons that were stated in the staff packet, it makes sense to go to the 75. So, Councilmember Katz and then Friedman.
No, I'm in agreement. I think the 75%. It is very comforting to know that the experts that are at this table are experts. And I mean that very sincerely, that I mentioned to some that, these types of numbers can actually make people's eyes glaze over, because you keep talking about the various scenarios. And bottom line on this, and I guess you always have to talk bottom line, especially when you're talking about funds, but bottom line on this is that we want every employee, every former employee to know that the money's going to be there when they need it, and that we're funding this in the proper way. So I'm very comfortable with the 75%. Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Friedman.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you. We have our retirees here who are steadfast. Representing our retirees here. We appreciate all of your engagement in this issue, which makes other eyes gloss over, but I know they have as much interest in this issue as I do, and all of us here do, so I appreciate that. Well, a couple things. First of all, thank you for all the work. I think the stress tests have been very helpful for us to see what this looks like. I will tell you from my perspective, having been involved in some defined benefit plans previously, I have been involved and worked with plans that were chronically underfunded, and I have been involved and worked with plans actually that were chronically overfunded, that they had to grapple at a certain point based on policy decisions that were intended to mitigate risk, but it was risk mitigation built on risk mitigation built on risk mitigation, which ultimately, because it wasn't reviewed regularly, may have been appropriate at the time where those policies were put into place, but was not adapted and ultimately led to what is also a negative outcome. We don't want an underfunded plan, because we need to provide for stability and consistency to our commitments that we've made to public employees for their health care, but we don't want it overfunded because we have other needs in the county as well and services that we want to provide. So my view was 75% looks like it could work, 85%. You heard from an actual expert, of which I'm not one, who said the same thing. I'm comfortable going to the 75% based on two things. One, if we don't do a minimum withdrawal, which we're going to get to that in a minute, but if I'm going to go to 75% here, I just will put it out there to colleagues. I wouldn't be comfortable doing a minimum withdrawal. And number two, we're reviewing it every 5 years. So this gives us plenty of time to adjust. If it looks like we're on the low end towards the 25th percentile rather than the 50 to the 75th percentile, then we may have to adjust this later. And I think we should be clear about that, ultimately this may need to be adjusted at a certain point. But as of right now, the biggest key is that we have a plan and that we follow the plan. And whether the number 75% or 80% or 85%, it matters much less over a 15-year horizon than being disciplined in actually setting a plan and following it. So to me, that's the most important. So I'm glad if there's executive and council agreement on that. I think that's the most important thing that we can accomplish here. Thank you.
Sounds like there's agreement on that one.
Okay, so moving on to page 9. Section 3 is amortization of liabilities. As I mentioned earlier, the executive supported the closed 15-year amortization period that the committee had discussed previously, and so included language for that in his proposed resolution. I did want to point out there is a line in there that says this includes amortizing all gains and losses over 15 years from the time incurred to reduce contribution volatility. This is something we discussed again back in March with the idea that when you're creating a closed period, if you have a huge loss in year 13 or year 14 of 15, then that could create a significant budget problem to try to make all that up in 1 or 2 years. So that's why the language includes that sentence. We did have one proposed amendment, which was to delete the final sentence, saying this may result in extending some amortization payments beyond the initial 15-year period, not because that statement's incorrect, but that statement we felt was less of a policy statement and more of just an explanatory statement, and that's why we felt it was better included in the staff report, but not in the policy itself, because essentially once you're a few years down the road, then that statement becomes irrelevant because you've already started your clock. So we want this to be a policy that kind of lasts forever and doesn't have to be amended. So that's the reason we are suggesting deleting that last sentence.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement with that.
Okay. So the next section on page 9 is investment rate of return. And for some context on this, Councilmember Friedson had requested that we look at developing a potential amendment to the language that was submitted here to note that the rate of return would be set by the CRHBT Board of Trustees. And then in looking into that, and talking with the executive branch staff, we thought it was important to kind of lay out how things have worked in the past and what might be needed to be done if the committee wants to take a slightly different approach or different process. So for the pension fund, the county code does assign the county's chief administrative officer the specific role of plan administrator and specifies that one of the CAO's roles as plan administrator is to set the plan assumptions after consultation with the Board of Trustees and the county's actuary. For the CRHBT, or I'll just call it the OPEB trust for ease of language, the county code does not include any language that assigns authority for assigning plan assumptions. So in practice, what has happened since the OPEB trust was established in 2011, the plan assumptions have been determined, including the investment rate of return assumption, has been determined in conjunction with and using the same process as the assumptions for the pension fund. So specifically, the CAO has made the final determination on these assumptions after consultation with the Board of Trustees and the county's actuary. And the Board of Trustees does have a statement of investment policy and objectives, which kind of actualizes this practice, noting that what they do is try to achieve a rate of return at or above the rate that's set by the plan administrator. So as a result, the current OPEB trust board does not currently approve an investment rate of return that is used for actuarial purposes, but instead just provides information to the CAO that is used in setting the pension OPEB trust return assumptions. So after talking this through, we feel that if the committee is interested in establishing a different process or different structure for who has the authority to make that, those investment return assumptions for the OPEB trust, we recommend that change should be made separately via legislation as opposed to this policy resolution, so it's much more clear, and that if the committee supports the current practice, they obviously, you don't have to make any changes to current law, but if you want to consider something different, that would be the vehicle to do it. And so as part of that, we've made some suggested edits to the language in the resolution that would allow this provision in the resolution to not have to change no matter what the council decides to do in terms of that process. So we would strike the language, it's listed on page 10, that says the assumed annual rate of return for CRHBT assets is currently 7.5%, outside the required policy review process described in provision 8. So strike that entire section and leave the remainder of it. And we feel that that language then, if the council does want to change the process, that would automatically be incorporated by this resolution. And if no change is made, then no changes need to be made to the resolution itself. That was a very long-winded explanation,
Yep.
but I will stop there for questions.
Yeah, appreciate it. Council Vice President Friedson?
Yeah, well, thank you for running this down a little bit. I didn't realize that it was different between the pension and the OPEB, which is interesting. I am interested in looking into whether or not we should change this, because I do think that the Board of Investment Trustees should be the ones that make these decisions, not the Chief Administrative Officer, most likely. Just in general, it seems like we're disconnecting the process a little bit. Now the Chief Investment Officer has a role in that, so it procedurally. But I think changing the language in this way would allow us that flexibility. I generally think neither the council nor the executive nor any of our appointees outside of the Board of Investment Trustees that's responsible for these decisions should be picking and choosing numbers. Like, ultimately, we don't get to choose what the inputs are to any other aspect of an actuarial analysis. The numbers are what they are. So, I think we should be true to that and make our calculations accordingly. So, stand by on that, colleagues. Maybe we can work together on that, since we have uncovered that dynamic. I mean, I will say everything's working fine, so this is not reflective of any concern I have with the current or any former Chief Administrative Officer in any decision that's been made. I have no issue with that. I just think from a process that now we're putting this into policy, we should be thinking about how we establish these decisions, what the inputs are, who's involved in them, where it comes from. And I think as much as possible, getting the elected officials and our direct appointees out of the process and just making actuarial mathematical calculations where we stick to our commitments. I think that makes it most likely that we will follow the policies that we set. And so I think it's important that we do that. But I'm supportive of the staff recommendations and look forward to addressing the broader issues in a separate and more appropriate form.
Yep. All right. I think that we have an agreement on that, so we can move on to number 5.
Okay. So number 5 is the CRHBT contributions and withdrawals section. As I mentioned earlier, the executive is recommending a $10 million fixed withdrawal, and that's the language at the very first part of this provision, at the bottom of page 10 and the first part of page 11. The language after that states that annual contributions and withdrawals beyond the fixed withdrawal will be determined by and result from the actuarial evaluation. So every time there's a valuation, it would say this year you are, based on the numbers, can take out $10 million, can take out $5 million, can take out $20 million, or you owe $5 million, $10 million, $20 million. So that's what would drive the budgetary process of what needs to be done each year. And we do note that it is noted in the policy that any variable withdrawals should be considered one-time expenditures and not ongoing, one-time savings and not ongoing savings, with the notation, though, that if the committee supports the $10 million fixed withdrawal, that would be considered an ongoing savings as opposed to a one-time. In terms of issues for the committee to consider, obviously the committee had always considered back from the March discussions that as this policy is developed over time, you would slowly be withdrawing more and more from the trust as long as we are in a position to still get to the target funded ratio, and that's what the great work by Bolton has showed us, and both how that works and also how it can vary based on what happens in actual investment returns. In terms of a fixed withdrawal, the primary advantage is to achieve greater budget consistency because you know that you're going to have the $10 million each year, and that also could be used on ongoing expenditures, so it provides a little bit more flexibility in how those funds could be used. The primary disadvantage is that it will reduce the annual funded ratios and potentially delay achievement of the target, especially under the poor investment return conditions. If you look at the data from the 25th percentile pessimistic scenario, which I know we hope we don't fall into, but you never know. There you have a much lower funded ratio, and it's about 55% at the end of the 15-year period with the $10 million fixed withdrawal scenario. So there are obviously advantages and disadvantages to both doing a fixed withdrawal or just having it be entirely variable. If the committee does not support a minimum annual withdrawal amount, you could just strike the first paragraph in the executive's recommended language and leave the other language submitted by the executive in place.
Great. Thank you. I'll start us off and say, yeah, I would, at this point, since we are just adopting this policy and we did set our target at 75%, that I am not supportive of the automatic, the fixed withdrawal of $10 million a year, and would support cutting the first paragraph. I think as we move forward and see how this policy does, and we're looking at it, that might be something we want to consider in the future. It does make me very concerned to have in this policy at the moment that we would have a fixed withdrawal and that there would be an assumption that that fixed withdrawal would go to ongoing expenses when we haven't really seen how this is going to work in practice. And so for those reasons, I would move that we strike the first paragraph. All right, I think there's second and thirded. Any conversation on that? Nope, I think we're good on that one, so we can move forward to number 6, guardrails.
Number 6, guardrails. Yeah, I don't actually have a lot to say on this one. This one should be relatively quick. I mentioned the guardrails that Bolton had proposed and kind of incorporated into the analysis that they had done earlier. And so the executive submitted language incorporating guardrails into the policy. And again, the idea there is if you're either 10% higher or lower than where you expect to be, those would automatically kick in. Okay. Then the last section is second to last section is deviations from actuarially required contribution. And in this, again, as we talked about in March, the idea being their provision in times of extreme fiscal stress or other situations, which would allow the executive and council to jointly agree to deviate from the policy, but we wanted to make sure that was spelled out. The language submitted by the executive ties it into the county's adopted fiscal policies, which specify economic recessions and or national emergencies as situations where you can vary from an established fiscal policy. Under the suggestion of Councilmember Friedson, we've included the definitions of both of those things, which are in the fiscal policies resolution, but we've also included them in this resolution itself to make it a little bit more clear, and those are the suggested amendments on page 12 that council staff has added. And again, those are the same definitions that are in the fiscal policies resolution, but just to have them here as well, so it's a little bit more understandable what those scenarios mean and when they could occur.
And we also suggested language about who's responsible rather than the county in general, specifying the executive and the council's roles.
Thank you, Mr. Trumpton. Yes, definitely. We're good? Council Vice President Friedson?
Yeah, thanks for including that. I mean, I think this is the flexibility that we talked about before, which is important. The policy goal sets what we want to happen. This allows us to have a release valve if it doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And I do appreciate the council has ultimate fiscal authority, and so I think clarifying it's not the county. There are formal rules here. executive recommends and the council approves, just like the budget, just like all fiscal decisions. So I think this clarifies that so everybody understands that there's a role and everybody has a role to play. So appreciate that, and think this looks good to me.
Yep, we're all good.
Okay, and our last section is number 8 on page 13, which is the required policy review. The executive is recommending that the county should review this policy every 5 years to confirm or update key assumptions that impact the actuarially required level of contributions or withdrawals. It does not prohibit the council or the executive from coming back if there's something that happens that requires an out-of-cycle review. So that's important. Staff does note that in addition to this being a general best practice, this timeframe does align with the experience study. That's done every 5 years, and so that's finishing up, I believe, this fall. Is that correct? So this would, we'd be kind of starting this right after an experience study. So every 5 years when there's an experience study that updates assumptions such as longevity and other things that have a key role in the overall costs of both pension plans and OPEB plans, we think that's good timing to do this as well.
Great. Any comments? No? We're good. on that.
Okay, so that's all the different elements. What we will do as the next step is take the make a formal resolution with all the amendments from the GEO committee for introduction and discussion at full council.
Wonderful. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Mr. Vicente, thank you for making the trip. We appreciate all the work that Bolton has done on this and really appreciate your input and guidance. And to the representatives from our retirees, thank you very much for being here and you being another set of eyes on this policy. We very much appreciate it. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.